Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
It is particularly New Englandy up here. I mean, it's not quite a white Christmas, but it's just generally cold and rainy and miserable. So it's there's much character building going on for the next generation up here in northern DMZ. I don't know how if you're experiencing one of your more milder winters. I've always liked the Washington D.C. winters. I always felt they lacked that bite of what we suffer with up north.
No, it depends. It depends on the year, Bill. We get hit here sometimes. Depending on how you look at it, the best and worst of every season. We do have the change of seasons here, but it's hot and humid in this swamp, and we do get some snow and some cold weather from time to time. So
I do when your mayor for life, Marion Barry, recently passed on. I know that's a tough moment for any D.C. local. I was living in D.C. during one of his mayoralties, and my first thought in my mind after I heard the news was that guy didn't plow my street. I never let that go. So
it does matter. There have been elections won and lost in I think places like New York and Boston over lesser. And you never want to be at.
That year was his last term, and I do believe that that failed response to that blizzard. I believe it was the blizzard of '96. I think people did not get over that, and that was a huge factor why he chose not to run again. Because his whole notion of being a competent mayor, as I think I said this before, everyone can look past ethical transgressions, but if you're doing your job, if you're doing something for me, I don't care. Once you're not plowing my street, and he was having problems plowing the streets even in his strongholds. I think that really undercut the possibility of really being a mayor for life.
I don't know if it's the same year, but I remember in the mid-'90s I've never lived in D.C., but I was living in Frederick, Maryland, where I'm from, and it was like 94, maybe it was 96, I don't know, but maybe it was 96. It was 3 or 4 feet of snow fell, probably got a little more in Frederick than you got in D.C., and I was working at Watson's Fried Chicken place where I worked, which is famous Frederick, Maryland establishment.
Still there?
No longer there. They do have a place called Billy Watson's Original Fried Chicken. That's a carryout that sells their patented recipe with the 11 herbs and spices. But I was working at Watson's restaurant on East Patrick Street downtown there, and I got trapped downtown, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I was trapped for 3 or 4 days. This is before cell phones. So there was no way to do any work, and all the bars opened up. So you'd be walking down Market Street in downtown Frederick, and there'd be bands playing inside the Alpenhof or Old Town Tavern, and people in the streets. It was like this festive environment where everyone just went outside, and it was it was like almost being in New Orleans. It was like a feel like that. So I have fond remembrances of that. Probably better than yours in the Mayor Barry era.
Well, back to the DMZ topics at hand. I had a post up over with the good people of Politico magazine, raising the question: can the left launch its own Tea Party? And some folks on the right I saw both on Twitter and over the Weekly Standard were sort of guffawing. Oh, now you want a Tea Party? Oh, now it's so awesome to have a Tea Party. But as pointed out in the article, there obviously were still downsides to what the Republican version of the Tea Party did, namely the shutdown in 2013, which seriously damaged the Republican brand for a period of time. They recovered by not shutting things down subsequently, despite Rush Limbaugh trying to make the argument that shutdowns don't have any consequences. But I think the question remains, and I wasn't necessarily advocating for it or not, but just pointing out that Jerry Nadler, who is the New York City congressman, very liberal congressman, told the Wall Street Journal, you're going to see a fight in the Democratic Party. There's substantial disagreement coming up. So there is some bubbling of discontent, and people are more noticing. Elizabeth Warren has gotten much more pointed in recent days, particularly in terms of this Treasury nominee, Antonio Weiss, that the White House has put up, arguing that he's too close to Wall Street and we can't have too many people coming with the revolving door has to stop. Much more pointed in her approach, saying enough is enough. Where she usually dulled a bit when it comes to directly challenging Obama or Hillary, for example. So there's some sense that there is an inclination in the populist corners of the Democratic Party to be more confrontational to party leadership in a way they were not doing in the last 6 years of the Obama presidency. They didn't take their marbles and go home when there was no public option in Obamacare. They didn't sink any of the budget agreements that came to pass, whether it was the 2010 tax cut deal or the 2011 deal with the Republican majority that raised the debt ceiling. These are things that Democrats complained about, but they stopped short of actively trying to block them.
All right. Well, let me jump in here, Bill.
Yeah.
Because I got two things for you. One, wasn't there this coffee party? Like, wasn't there a coffee party movement a few years ago?
There's all sorts of grassroots attempts. There's Occupy. Occupy did a whole lot better than the coffee party did. There was the other 98%. There's been a handful of things like that. But I'm not really talking about stuff on the street. I'm not talking about the Tea Party in that respect. I'm talking about the congressional Tea Party caucus and the Republican Party that said, we're not going to vote for your stuff, John Boehner. We're going to try to block what you're trying to do that we think is milquetoast, and that is either going to just sink bills outright or force you to have to cozy up to Democrats to get things done. But my question is, will congressional Democrats do something similar? Not whether there are there's already been progressives in the streets trying to stoke this kind of conflict.
All right. But is this you, Bill? But is this Bill Scher being a troublemaker, needing a column to write, and coming up with something that theoretically could happen, or are you seeing hints that this might? Elizabeth Warren being the obvious example, but anything bubbling that you're picking up on?
Well, the only explicit things you can point to are Warren's comments and Nadler's comments. Beyond that, this is all speculation. But what I did point out in the piece was there are a lot of pinch points in the pipeline where these populist Democrats are going to potentially be in a position to shape deals or sabotage deals. We're on the verge of passing the so-called Cromnibus, which will keep the government open till September. Well, that's till September. And even to get this bill passed, we were seeing there are various conservative riders that are being tacked on to the legislation. What's going to happen in the September version when it's a fully Republican Congress that's shaping the bill and negotiating with the president? Are the spending levels going to get cut? Are there going to be some real serious poison pills in terms of riders on the legislation? I assume Obama is going to veto some of these bills as they come up the ladder. But at some point, a final compromise will have to be reached, or the government will shut down. And it's possible that what is acceptable to Obama won't be acceptable to this populist faction. And if a bunch of Republicans say this compromise doesn't suit us either, and Democrats are needed to pass the bill, well, then they become the balance of power. And the question is, do they want to take the position of, let's actually stop this deal, or do they go back to form and say, let's just smooth out some of the rough edges and let it go through? That's what I'm suggesting is a possibility, and saying it's a time to think about which is the better strategy. Does it make more sense for the populist wing to do maximum confrontation, or is there a point where you take the confrontation too far? Maybe a progressive shutdown is not a good idea, even if there's stuff in the bill that you find distasteful. Those are the kind of questions they're going to think about, particularly in terms of keeping the government open. There's also issues in regards to the Patriot Act. There's a Patriot Act, a sunset date for certain provisions on June 1st. That's a hard deadline. things that don't have a hard deadline, if there's a corporate tax reform that includes infrastructure spending, which Obama has floated as a possibility. There are progressives that really hate this idea. Not that they don't like the infrastructure, but they think that the infrastructure will be so small compared to the giveaways that will happen to multinational corporations to make it unacceptable.
Let me ask you, when has Obama gone against the base? Like, I don't know that there are a lot of occasions when he has bucked the professional left, as they say.
Well, he's leaned on them. Look, he's leaned on them in terms of not having a public option, in terms of not capping the size of banks in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform, in terms of doing the 2010 tax cut deal, which extended the Bush tax cuts for a period of time, in terms of the 2011 budget deal, which brought on the sequester. And then
so maybe the reason that it may be that it's hard to recall these incidents because there isn't a big fight, at least not publicly. It's not they don't make a scene. And that's why I have to say I've sort of admired the discipline that the Democrats have shown in contrast to Republicans. And on one hand, I find it astonishing that anybody would, on the Democratic side, would sort of would want to do anything, because it seems to me like they're just sort of rolling along like a juggernaut because they've stuck together, because they haven't aired their dirty laundry that much. But I suppose if you're a liberal activist, if you're, a liberal special interest, you may not see things that way, and maybe maybe they need a little time off for bad behavior, as the country song says. Maybe there's an itch they need to scratch, and like the idea that they could, you put on your nice clothes and you behave properly for as long as you can, but at some time you gotta let loose, and maybe like they've been suppressing the urge to let their freak flag fly for too long.
Well, I think that's right. I think up to this point, and I have argued this, I think you've seen a healthy tension in the Democratic big tent between the populist and the more business-friendly side. They have their disagreements, but they work through them. They come up with compromises like Dodd-Frank, like the Affordable Care Act. They don't let the disagreements be debilitating. They don't. There was no disastrous party split in 2012. Everyone comes together at the end of the day, and then they go fight on issue by issue and do the best they can. The question for the populists, I mean, there's certainly a element of the left saying that's not good enough. We need to fully eradicate corporate influence from the party. We need to throw our weight around. We need to break some China, and we'll come. And we have the people with us. There's lots of polls that say people don't want more tax giveaways. They want increased Social Security benefits. They don't want these trade deals. We should fight for them, and we'll come out looking good on the other end. Now there may be a medium between those 2 points where populists push a little harder than they have been, try to get a bit more of an upper hand, but it's a bending and not a breaking of the party. So it shouldn't necessarily be looked at as just an either-or situation. But you do have a lot of these points coming up, and trade is one of them that I haven't mentioned yet. There might be a fast-track bill coming up soon. The specific agreements for Pacific trade agreements, the European trade agreements, they might get finalized and come to Congress. These are areas where the populists have to say to themselves, do I want to stop these things and go all out? Do I have to pick and choose my battles, try to stop some but not the others? Or do we just try to recognize, look, we don't have the numbers for some of these things, they're just going to pass, and so better just make our case to the public and not worry so much about stopping them in the halls of Congress if it's going to be too hard of a fight to get to rally the numbers around.
Well, it would be. I welcome this, and it would be fun to watch for a while a little action on the left, because so far it's been like Tom Brady just putting together a drive, marching down the field, every time. And it would be nice to maybe see some dissension and on the left. So,
well, I think you will see more. I think you will see more than you have seen. The question is, how bad will it get, and will it be productive or counterproductive? That's what I think are the unknowns.
But they are known unknowns. So
I think those are known unknowns.
Let's do a segue, Bill. Let's talk about something different.
Well, you were on Fox
transition.
News over the weekend
Yes.
on Howard Kurtz's media analysis show Reliable Sources.
Media buzz. Fox Media
it's
Buzz.
not reliable. So it's not Reliable Sources anymore. They changed the name when he went over to Fox. And so you had some views about the debacle with the Rolling Stone coverage of this alleged University of Virginia gang rape allegation.
That's right, I did, Bill. Why don't you remind me what I said? What was my view?
You seem to take the view that sort of Rolling Stone is in the total wrong. This is clear case of media bias. And
I see. Yeah.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem to be saying that people should not be so quick to assume that a rape allegation is true because of this incident.
Well, look, I will say there were several pieces that came out. I guess most notoriously a piece in the Washington Post, which said we should automatically believe what rape victims say, what alleged rape victims say, no matter what happens with this Rolling Stone story. I mean, everyone is essentially conceding that the story that Jackie, the alleged victim, put forward doesn't hold water. It's all sorts of problems with the story. Now, maybe something else happened to her. It's entirely possible, but not what was reported by Rolling Stone. There are too many holes in her story that just can't be squared. As I use various metaphors that don't make any sense together. So I was pushing back against that notion. I mean, it strikes me that Rolling Stone that they had a narrative in mind, that they had an agenda. They went looking for a story about someone who had been raped on a campus. They found what they were looking for. And then they didn't really vet the alleged victim. They didn't talk to the alleged perpetrators or rapists. They didn't do some of the due diligence, including was there a party on the night that this horrific event supposedly happened. All these things. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that, I think we do have a thing in this country about being presumed innocent. And, I think that it's a bad idea that you would assume that because somebody makes an allegation against somebody else, that the presumption of guilt is just fundamentally an un-American concept. Doesn't, obviously these horrible things happen, but I think Rolling Stone really did a disservice on a variety of reasons, including the fact that the next time something like this happens, that potentially that victim may not get as much sympathy or attention as she might have otherwise gotten. So, I mean, I do think we have a responsibility to try to get these things right. I think outlets like Rolling Stone, these mainstream media outlets that have been around for a long, long time, broken big stories. I mean, they took down General Stanley McChrystal. It's especially incumbent upon them. I mean, the expectation is that they've got fact checkers, that they're doing thorough, proper reporting. And when they drop the ball like that, there are consequences.
Well, I mean, no one is defending Rolling Stone in this debacle. Not even Rolling Stone. So no one's going to suggest that people should just do what they did in the future. But it does, I think, raise the question: how should both the media and legal institutions treat rape and sexual assault allegations? And you have a lot of consternation on the left and in feminist quarters, worried that what Rolling Stone did is going to make it harder for the vast majority of legitimate rape allegations. And again, it's very possible that this one woman's story actually is legitimate, just got botched in the telling. But putting that matter aside,
and then one thing Rolling Stone has done is make the term legitimate rape a much more relevant and frequently used term, I think, in a couple of years.
So there's a concern that now we're going to go back to the old days where women's stories are going to be immediately questioned and not taken seriously because of Rolling Stone's mistake. I'm a bit more sanguine about that because let's recall we had the Duke lacrosse debacle, and I think between the Duke lacrosse case and the UVA case, I think feminists have made great strides in creating an environment where these allegations are taken more seriously. I mean, the Bill Cosby case, I think, is the quintessential example of that. So I think these mistakes can be overcome. There's another question whether should it be overcome? Should these cases be taken at face value? Should it be an automatic assumption that they're correct? And without getting into a question of absolutes, I think it is imperative. I mean, we had a situation not so long ago where if a woman had where the woman was making an accusation, that she would immediately be not taken seriously by the police, that the question would turn on her immediately, and the cases would not be seriously investigated. And I think we've gone a long way to moving away from that, and we need to keep moving away from that. Once the allegation happens, it is incumbent on the police officers to investigate the alleged crime, not put the accuser through the ringer. Maybe you don't get the evidence, maybe you can't prove the case, but you at least should investigate the case seriously. I think that standard has to remain. For a media outlet to report on a case, the Eric Wemple blog at the Washington Post talked about a lecture that the Rolling Stone editor gave in 2006, where he was defending the idea of opinion journalism, where he said, quote, "We'll write what we believe." And he said, "I want to do stuff that's biased," which, when you take out of context, sounds horrible. But at the end of the talk, there was a college reporter like that reported on it, and quotes, "Bias," maintains Will Dana, "does not mean unbalanced," quote unquote. Then the reporter paraphrases, "They have to exercise extreme depth of analysis and reporting in writing their stories. In fact, confided Dana, his all-time favorite stories are those which deliberately framed extremely controversial issues in a manner which was both emotive and unabashedly honest." And so Eric Wemple says that standard was recklessly abandoned here.
And let's give Wemple some props. He's done some great reporting and analysis on this story.
But you could have reported on this story. The reporter could have taken the accusation seriously and had a bias towards believing it, and still done a better job of reporting it, actually reaching out to the accusers and weighing.
Right, but then her story might have fallen apart, Bill.
Well, it might have, but that reporter didn't have to make that judgment after going through the effort to report the story. She stopped in the middle.
But we need to report about this. This is an important issue, and we have an edition coming out in a few weeks. And I've already written 5,000 words on this, and it's too good to check. If I find out that there are some discrepancies, then I'm obviously being facetious here, but this is the problem with this sort of narrative journalism agenda.
She could have reported the story better. She could have talked to the other people involved. She might have found discrepancies. She might still believe the accuser, but she should at least then report the discrepancies so the reader can weigh the evidence for themselves. Even if at the end of the day, she makes clear this is where I come out and what I believe. But you separate what is factual and you separate what is opinion. That's a totally possible thing to do.
Well, but I think it's fair. But what I'm trying to describe is why these mistakes happen. And by the way, there's some suggestion that it's not a mistake, that she's some sort of a fabulist in the shattered glass tradition, and that people are going to go through and question some of the other things she's written in the past. Which brings us to to the sort of new media trend of checking out things like this. I mean, I wrote a somewhat controversial piece the other day, kind of criticizing the notion that vigilante journalism, now go track down who this person is, put pictures up of who we think Jackie is and her address and information like that, and say, hey, it's only fair. She accused this fraternity in the name of transparency. Another incident, which I think is a much more positive development, is John Nolte at Breitbart, who has gotten Lena Dunham and her publisher to back down a little bit from allegations in her memoir. I guess she claims she was raped by a Republican named Barry at your alma mater, I think, Bill. And John Nolte, I believe, went there and tracked down Barry, and Barry has now retained the services of a libel attorney. And the last I heard, Dunham's publisher has offered to pay that attorney, which I think, if I'm that attorney, implies that he may actually have a good case.
Well, I mean, but she gave a statement yesterday where she said the mistake is that I should make clear Barry's a pseudonym and not his actual name. She's saying that this person is not the person she's talking about, and that future editions of the book will clarify that. So she's not saying that this allegation is not true. She's saying that it got garbled by using by not making clear there was a pseudonym.
Right, but it seems like people thought that this guy was the rapist. That would have been the assumption, and that's a serious thing for her to have done. Aside from the questions as to whether or not this actually happened, I think that's what got Breitbart looking into this to begin with. But anyway, we are seeing new media outlets digging into these stories, and I do think that there is a sense. There is a sense that if you are going to accuse somebody of something, and it looks like that is a false accusation, that you yourself are then you then sort of waive your rights of anonymity, or you've opened the door for people to really do some digging in to your story to see if what you're claiming is accurate. I kind of see both sides of that. I mean, it's not a clear-cut thing. The world is changing and media is changing. I think it's just something that's happening.
Well, I don't think we want to be in a situation where a woman can't make an accusation without being publicly harangued, because that is going to just totally chill the ability to prosecute any rapes or sexual assaults. I don't think we want to be, stringing up the accused in the public square without a trial either. But you want to have an environment where the police are going to take these accusations seriously, and women are going to have an incentive to make the accusation because they know they will be taken seriously. And
right. I completely agree. I completely agree with you, Bill. Certainly about the police part of it. There's no doubt about that. I have really grave concerns about this whole thing. I will say that there are consequences for accusations and allegations. I mean, the fraternity house, I guess, was vandalized. The fraternity that was accused of this, apparently erroneously, has had to pay a lot of money for security. There could have been. The other thing too is that there could have been repercussions. Alyssa Rosenberg over at the Washington Post was pointing this out on Twitter. We talked about it here, Bill. A story about a year ago of someone named Dr. V. Do you remember this? The Grantland story.
Oh yeah.
This story. This transsexual who was apparently a fraud selling this golf club and was about to be exposed by a journalist and committed suicide. Well, there are, what if somebody had killed one of these fraternity, brothers, out of revenge, assuming he was guilty? Or what if a blogger puts up a picture ostensibly of Jackie that's another woman, the wrong woman? and that woman is targeted for some sort of violence. I mean, there are real consequences to this sort of thing. It's a very huge ethical debate that I think we would be having in the old days, sort of in the journalism world. But now you've got the problem where you could say, well, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. If we don't put out this name, or someone else is going to do it. And then you have kind of rogue reporters who now have Twitter, Instagram, whatever, who can just sort of take this on their own and do it. So there's a possibility for a lot of harm to come from these kind of stories. And I do think it's so important that we strive to get things right and to be responsible and ethical in how
I suspect that after this Rolling Stone story, that any journalist that pursues these types of allegations are going to approach it in a very, very different way than what Rolling Stone did, Rolling Stone included. And that's why I think that I don't think this is going to result in a turning back of the clock. I think it's going to result in an improvement, both in the media approach for these kinds of stories. I mean, I think the Washington Post story about the Bill Cosby allegations was I mean, as far as I can tell, a mass work of journalism. Maybe someone else would come out that would make me change my view, but that seemed to be a very, very particular story that did weigh all sides, although it had a great weight of information from the accusers. So I definitely see a light forward for quality journalism for these cases. And I don't think that the advocates for rape and sexual assault survivors are going to let up at all at making sure that we have an environment that women can come out and safely and make accusations when warranted. So I don't foresee dark days ahead on this score. That's my personal opinion.
Well, all I could say is I would hope and I would wish that the kind of radical feminists would be advocating the truth rather than assuming that either party is innocent or guilty.
Well, I mean, but just like with a lawyer,
we should automatically believe the alleged victim. I agree with everything you said. You got to investigate it. You shouldn't harangue people or make them immediately turn on them. But I do think we have the presumption of innocence. I tweeted out, I think I was the first person to tweet this out, have none of these people read To Kill a Mockingbird? It's one of my favorite books. Harper Lee and, Atticus Finch, I think, is probably my favorite, fictional character. And who, of course, defends an innocent man accused of rape. But I guess we should, and I think that book illustrates the perils of being guilty until proven innocent.
Well, I don't think it's fair to put upon the advocates for the survivors to have to vet every single individual case that comes to them. Just like you wouldn't expect, a prosecutor or a defense attorney. Someone comes to you with a case, you take the case. You don't do your own separate investigation to decide whether they're innocent or guilty first. That's not the lawyer's job. The lawyer's job is to take the case, make the best case possible, and then the judge or the jury has to adjudicate guilt or innocence. The police have to do their investigation and decide whether an arrest or an indictment is warranted. If you're gonna ratchet the bar down and say every advocate organization out there is going to have to do their own independent investigation first before taking on a case and advocating for that person, I mean, that's just not that's an extremely rigid standard that we don't put upon actual attorneys. I
would completely disagree. I think there's a huge difference between. I mean, the adversarial system of our attorneys and the fact that you have complete confidentiality and that every man deserves his day in court and that we believe that every person deserves representation whether they're guilty or innocent. I don't think you can apply that to anything else. That's a very unique circumstance in our legal system. Yes, I do think that whether you're an activist or an organization, that you do have, it is incumbent upon you to vet the people that you're ostensibly defending, and if and when you don't, you will be tainted by that. If you are wrongly we are judged. I talk to the right about this all the time. That the friend of your friend is not your enemy. We shouldn't just reflexively, defend Ted Nugent because he hates Barack Obama. If we do, then we will be slimed by whatever crazy things Ted Nugent has said. We are judged by those people to some degree or another, fairly or not. And I think it is incumbent upon these organizations. I mean, because they will be held accountable if they are supporting somebody who turns out to be bogus. Then that's going to stick to their reputation and their credibility.
I mean, I don't think it's fair to blame the advocate. I mean, when an advocate gets a case of someone saying I've been raped or sexually assaulted, the immediate thing is to put give that person a safe space, make sure they're protected from any repercussions, tell them what their legal options are. I mean, these are folks who don't know what their legal options are or afraid to speak out, and so you need to have a supportive apparatus to get to the place where they can actually make the formal accusation. Well, it depends what your mission is.
I mean, if you're a shelter or a battered wives home, then of course. But if you're going to be like legally going out, going after people, and I think it's different. But I would say this: I think Rolling Stone was essentially playing the role of one of these activist organizations that you're talking about, and I think that's inherently the problem.
And that's not a media's job. A media's job is to give all sides, even if it's opinion journalism. I mean, if you're going to come out, one way or the other at the end of the story, you still got to report the full story as best you can. So I think a media's job is different than a police job, is different than an advocate's job, and so I just don't think we should let these things.
Right, but I think it was advocacy journalism is part of the debate. But look, I mean, I think this is the fact that we are having this. I mean, I think a pretty spirited discussion for the DMZ shows you. I mean, this is a very complicated and sensitive topic, of course.
Well, I need to jump, get some real work done.
This isn't real work. Come on. We're entertaining.
What's what pays me for that? It'll be real work. So
yeah,
we will talk next week.
You don't get paid for this. You don't get paid for this.
You do get paid for this.
They said not to. They said not to. No, never mind. Yeah, let's just stop. Yeah, I got to go too, Bill. Let's wrap this up.
Till next week, sir.
All right. See you in the DMZ. Bye.